And before moving forward, please allow me to introduce to you our amazing group of panelists. With us today, we have Ogay Mohammed from Project Anar. We have Leila Ayub, also from Project Anar. Kim Lung, an immigration and human rights attorney. Esposhmi Nasari, a member of the Afghan American Community Organization and an immigration attorney. And lastly, we have Robin Barnard, Senior Advocacy Counsel at Human Rights First. Thank you to our panelists for making time to be with us today, and let's get started. Just before we start, this is more of a question and answer setting instead of a presentation, because we know that all of you are here with many questions, and we hope you find the material useful. As I mentioned, please feel free to use the Q&A box, and we will try our best to monitor your questions. Let's get started with our first question for our colleagues from ANAR. What are the options for Afghans who are in third countries? And what are the options for Afghans who are still in Afghanistan?
Yeah, so we're gonna talk about the options for those outside of the US, including still in Afghanistan or in a third country. And there are a lot of different pathways that do exist. So I am going to start off with just humanitarian parole, although there are other options.
Is there a chance for us to translate this, or?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
Is there a chance for us to translate this all in Farsi or Dari or?
I think it's simultaneous.
Hello. Yeah. Yes, I'm turning the interpretation on.
Sorry, go ahead. Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead, Leila. Thank you.
Thank you. So humanitarian parole is an option that is typically used when someone does not have any other options to pursue to access immigration to the US. It is used for urgent humanitarian reasons or public benefit, significant public benefit. And many Afghans, of course, have been using this because of the urgency of this current moment. You are eligible to apply even if you are eligible for other pathways. However, you still need to express why you need the urgency of humanitarian parole. Humanitarian parole does not confer immigration status. So if someone is paroled into the US or is given a parole approval, they would still have to apply for some other type of immigration status when they get to the US. Applying for humanitarian parole and getting an application approved does allow someone to obtain a travel document and come to the United States. It doesn't make you ineligible for other applications. You can apply for other applications at the same time. And it doesn't matter if you have other applications pending already, someone can still apply for humanitarian parole. Obviously, one of the challenges many people are facing is that there is an application fee per person. And that has always been the case, and that there is an application required per person as well. They're not per family. There's some new challenges with Afghan applications at this time, given the events since August. So I'll pass it to Ogay to give a little bit more context for what is currently happening.
Yeah, hi everyone. This is Ogay Mohammed from Project Anar. And so I just really quickly wanted to talk, like Leila said, about the challenges with humanitarian parole right now, and specifically with the applications. USCIS, the Immigration Office, typically gets around 2,000 of these applications per year. As of right now, we're hearing that they have received anywhere from 8,000 to 14,000 of these applications. And if the pace continues, they expect to receive 150,000 of these applications in a year. Their systems are not equipped to deal with that type of volume and to deal with that many applications. Frankly, they don't even have enough staff to look at all of those applications. So that's caused a really large backlog right now. And there is a component of the humanitarian parole application where you have to go to the US Embassy, have an interview. They do fingerprinting, they look at your identity documents. And that's an important part of the parole application. And the US government is maintaining that requirement. They're keeping that requirement. And as a lot of us know, there is no US Embassy in Afghanistan right now. There hasn't been since the evacuations ended on August 31st. So USCIS is stalled in that process. They're still figuring out what to do with that US Embassy piece. And some of the guidance has been that people should travel to third countries. And as we all know, traveling to third countries is difficult. It's dangerous. We aren't really recommending it to people because it's also not entirely certain that the cases will get adjudicated once you do go to that third country. There's also the issue of travel. The passport offices in Afghanistan have been closed for a very, very long time, and people can't travel to another third country usually without a passport or a visa. So that's also a significant barrier there as well. With the issue of timing as well, we've been receiving letters from USCIS saying that the cases will be decided in 90 to 120 days. That's the usual turnaround time for humanitarian parole applications, but it's just not the case anymore. USCIS hasn't made a decision on cases in a very long time, and that 90 to 120 days is likely not going to happen. This is going to be a much longer process, but like Layla said, there's such an emergency need right now that it is the option that people are turning to. And for many people in Afghanistan who are not US affiliated, it is the potentially fastest way to gain access to travel to the United States.
I'll just add quickly, in case there are questions about this, the application itself, it consists of one application form that is for parole, and then there's a separate application form that is for a sponsor, someone that can sign on and say that they can make sure that this person is financially supported when they come to the US. And that is also one of the barriers to applying, and could hold up the application process for people. And just to that last piece about how there's so many applications and it's taking longer for them to be processed, typically it's very difficult to get a humanitarian parole application granted, and it is reserved for the most urgent circumstances. And obviously many Afghans are experiencing very urgent circumstances, and that's why there's also advocacy happening to try to create different pathways, but this is the current reality.
Thank you very much for that information. And any other of our panelists wanting to contribute to the humanitarian parole conversation? If not, I'm sorry, it was...
Anna, I was just going to add, I've seen a few questions in the chat about whether it's required to have a valid passport to travel with humanitarian parole. And I just wanted to address that you do not need a passport to travel here. Once you have the approved humanitarian parole from the US government, they will issue you a document that will allow you to get here once you have everything approved.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that is that potentially someone has to travel to a third country. And so it's not a requirement from the US government, but it could be a requirement to get here.
Thank you for that information. And are there other options other than humanitarian parole available for individuals to pursue who are still not in the US?
So I could answer that. Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum, salam alaikum, everyone. In terms of options, whether they're in Afghanistan or another country, several of the options that we have is for those who have either worked for a government entity or they served for some sort of a nonprofit organization that was affiliated with the United States, or they were working for an NGO, they could potentially apply for P1, P2, and P1, P2. Those are applications that have to be completed by your organization that you work for, or the employer that you work for. They have to file it on your behalf. They would have to give you the recommendation letter. I hear a lot about people asking about P3 family reunification. For that, they have to be, the application has to be put forth by a resettlement agency. So for example, if one family member is in the United States, and then the sibling or the parents or the immediate family are still stuck out, once that individual is here in the US, they can seek to do family reunification, and the resettlement agency has to file that on your behalf. The other option is the special immigrant visas. Those processes, if you're outside of Afghanistan, you can do those. You have to get the COM letter, you have to get the approval, you have to find the government entity that you either translated for or the military to provide you with the letter of recommendation. The challenges we have seen there is that many people are not able to access those individuals that they were employed by. So if there's someone here in the US that you can connect with that can try to help you find that person, that is a viable option. So we have P1, P2. For those that are here in the US and they got evacuated and they got separated, they could potentially do P3 with their resettlement agencies and then the SIV petitions.
Thank you. And I'm seeing several questions pertaining to fee waivers and the use of the fee waiver form. Are there any delays caused by the use of this form? Is it harmful? Can people use it?
So I can answer this question from the humanitarian parole perspective. So a part of the humanitarian parole application has a form called the I-134, and that's a form that tells the US government that you have a US-based sponsor that can support you when you're here. And the challenge that we've been running into is that there's a balance, right, between saying that you can sponsor someone to come to the United States and that you also can't afford to pay for the application fee. So we've been, for folks who are working through our project, we have not been filling out fee waivers. We have heard that the fee waiver form is just another form that USCIS has to look at. So if it's submitted with the application, we have seen some applications get sent back with a rejection of that form, and it has the potential to slow down the process. Just as a practical tip, we've heard from USCIS that the person who is requesting humanitarian parole should also be the person that is filling out the fee waiver and the person signing the fee waiver. If those things don't line up, they'll outright reject the fee waiver.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Any other panelists who would like to contribute to this segment, to this part of the conversation before we move on?
I think we just wanted to flag as well that aside from these humanitarian-based travel options, that there are other ways that people can apply to come to the United States. When you, say, have family members that have status here in the United States, perhaps if you have are in a profession that would allow you to apply for an employment-based visa. There are also many universities here who are wanting to sponsor scholars and other professionals to come and teach and be at universities here in the United States. So we would really recommend that you look at all of the options that are out there to see if you might be eligible for another type of status, given the challenges with humanitarian parole, the special immigrant visa option, and refugee processing. And Sparsh might have some more on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just echo Robin on that. So if you have family members, like you have a brother, sister, parents here in the US, and they can file normally for siblings or other categories, for preference categories, it may take years to process that petition. But right now, USCIS is expediting at the initial stage to process those applications. We have seen significant decrease in the time that they're approving those petitions. And the other one is, as Robin mentioned, is the J1s. I know a lot of universities are scrambling to file those for individuals. And the biggest challenge is when you do a J1, you have to show intent to return back to the home country. And I had an individual who was able to get his interview scheduled in Islamabad, but because he can prove that he would be returning to Afghanistan in the future, there's challenges in getting that visa. So we are working on that. There's a lot of advocacy going on that at major levels at universities. So J1 may be an option, family petition, and also, as Robin mentioned, employment-based. Within a short period of time, there's been a significant advocacy work done. So in the coming weeks, in the coming months, we will, continue to do the advocacy and find other means of evacuating Afghans from Afghanistan.
If I can also add, though, that even if individuals are applying for these other non-humanitarian forms of relief or immigration pathways, keep in mind that the consulate, the embassy in Kabul is closed. And so it's still going to require travel to a third country, which is going to force us to revisit these travel issues that we've been discussing regarding the lack of a passport, et cetera. So regardless of what you apply for, if a third embassy or consulate is processing, then they're going to be dealing with the same travel issues. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm also seeing some questions regarding sponsorships by universities, and also if you're low income, whether you can sponsor someone for humanitarian parole. I think it's important to remember that anyone can apply for humanitarian parole, right? You can apply for a family member, you can apply for even for someone who's not related to you. And it's not just an individual who can apply for humanitarian parole for another individual, it's an organization that can apply. And so, I've applied on behalf of organizations, I've applied on behalf of family members, I've applied on behalf of non-family members. The issue is going to be able to get someone to submit financial sponsorship papers. Okay, that's going to be really important. So let's say you're very low income and you want to, or you're here on humanitarian parole or other status, and you want to petition for someone from Afghanistan to come under humanitarian parole. Well, you can. You just need to find someone or an organization who is willing to submit and sign financial sponsorship papers so that they can show that this person will be financially provided for if they're able to come to the United States. So I hope that answers a lot of the questions for the individuals who are asking about the sponsorship element of humanitarian parole.
Yeah, I just want to add, I linked an FAQ document about the sponsorship requirements for humanitarian parole. I know there are many Afghans on this call, and likely many who are in the US and trying to pursue options for their family that are still in the country. So when we hear the term sponsor, it often is used in a different context of like family-based sponsoring someone so they can come here and get a green card or something like that. And the sponsorship for humanitarian parole is very different from that. It's just one component of the application. And the requirements are much lower. So I recommend reviewing this document because you might qualify even if your income is low. I also see a bunch of questions about identity documents. So even with the passport, if you don't have a passport, even though it's not a requirement, you should explain in your application why you can't have a passport. And there might be very basic explanations like the passport office in Afghanistan has been closed for so long. Or you can't travel to it, whatever that may be. And then we want these applications to be as strong as possible. But some people don't have every identity document. So what we're just doing is doing the best we can with what you have and explaining why you don't have anything better in the application.
And then you can also substitute for the lack of these documents in the form of a sworn declaration, testifying on paper why you don't have the document and why you're unable to locate the document and why you claim to be who you are or whatever it is. But I don't encourage any of you to be doing this alone. I encourage every single one of you who's out there who wants to file for this process to seek the assistance of an experienced American attorney, immigration attorney who would be able to help. And I know that a lot of people are volunteering their time to doing this without legal fees. And so, hopefully you'll be able to get in touch with one of us in this group who might be able to help you as an organization or as a private attorney.
I also, I do want to leave space for others to talk about something else other than humanitarian parole, but I do quickly want to circle back on the identity documents as well. I see some questions about tazkere, and usually we submit applications with tazkere, but we understand that a lot of children, a lot of people don't have tazkere, and with that as well, we tell people who don't have that documentation to put it in a signed statement where they can explain the situation. A lot of our reasoning that we have put into letters are things like, this is a newborn baby. We just have the offices are closed. They would have to travel to a different city to get their identity documents, and traveling isn't exactly safe right now, and it hasn't been safe for a while. I also saw a question about letters, so I really quickly want to address that too. I think in the beginning, the focus of humanitarian parole applications was really getting these applications in as soon as possible, and that has shifted now to getting them in as soon as possible, but also putting forth the absolute best evidence you can. So if Afghans have access to letters where a third party can speak to your job and why your job makes you at risk, or any medical conditions you have that you need treatment for in the United States, or anything like that, people should take time and effort to gather those materials to submit with your humanitarian parole application.
Thank you very much. Any last comments before we move to the following section? If not, I'm mindful of time. Let's continue and move to our next segment. We are now going to talk about Afghans who are arriving at military bases, what the legal process looks like for them, and what their options are. I will pass it to my colleague, Robin, to give us a brief background on Afghans who are currently being housed in military bases.
Thanks, Anna. So for those who are coming to the United States, this includes people who have already arrived here, which is close to, I believe, 70,000 or more Afghans have already arrived here in the United States. But also those who are waiting on military bases outside of the United States in places like Qatar and Kosovo. Everyone is being first sent to a base, what we're being told to call safe havens here in the United States, where they undergo initial processing before they are then allowed to travel to a final destination city here in the United States to reunite with their family, or to start their lives in their new city. So we wanted to just quickly talk about what happens while you're on the bases, which Spojni can speak directly to, because she's spent quite a bit of time in the past few weeks helping people at some of the bases on the East Coast of the United States. And then talk about what happens with your legal cases and what are your legal options once you're here in the United States. Most people who are coming through, around 60% of those who've arrived here in the United States are being admitted into the country on parole. So that same thing that Layla and Ogai just described, the humanitarian parole. When you enter the country, humanitarian parole doesn't give you permanent status here in the United States. So you then have to seek other immigration status that we'll discuss in a moment. The other people who've entered in a country, around 40%, have entered in the process of obtaining that special immigrant visa status, which does allow then immediately give you permanent residence here in this country. So those people who came through the special immigrant visa process are being allowed to continue that process to completion, even here in the United States. So that is good. And we are actively working on solutions for that large group of people who are coming in on humanitarian parole, so that they don't have to go through lengthy other processes like asylum that we can describe for you. But hopefully that will allow people to immediately adjust their immigration status and get permanent residence here in the United States after they enter the country. That hasn't happened yet, but we are pushing and advocating for that as a community. So I think I want to ask Swajmi to talk a bit more in detail about what she has seen is happening on the bases and what you can expect to happen on your legal case while you're on the bases.
Thank you very much, Robin. So I had the opportunity to go, so there are 8 bases, as Robin mentioned, mostly in the East Coast, some in Texas and Wyoming and New Jersey. I had the opportunity to go to Fort Lee, Fort Pickett, and Fort Quantico, which are all in New Jersey through the USCCB organization that was able to host me. Now, for all of you that may be aware or not, the bases are not right now consistent in the legal services they're providing. Fort Lee was the model that was, they had evacuated people as early as mid-July. So they were a little bit in progress. So when I was doing these sessions with my colleagues, Chris Cheney, and then someone else from the other organizations, they were talking about that. So the basis, what we were doing is at this point in time, at least the bases that I was at, which are providing a lot of the legal services, they're not per se doing any applications on site. They haven't progressed that much. What we were doing is, one, my colleague was providing, like IRC and some of the other organizations were providing information about the benefits pertaining to the resettlement benefits for 3 months, along with the federal benefits that just passed on September 30th. My part of the job was to say, as Robin mentioned, everybody got it paroled in. Whether you had an SIV that was started, whether you had your COM letter approved, whether you had the 360 approved, whether you had a KBL number, it didn't matter. If you were paroled in, then you were meeting with IRC, doing the biometrics, doing the fingerprinting, doing the medical examination, security clearance, doing the work permit that was being processed and then sent to IOM in Washington, DC, and then they were getting scheduled. So whenever you got assigned to a resettlement agency. So the legal options, once you leave the base, as Robin said, you have to find either SIV, P1, P2, P3, asylum. I have a lot of clients who got paroled in, but they have family petition, their spouse of a US citizen. So you're gonna have to do some sort of relief to get them relief. The biggest challenge is everybody wanting to get off the bases. But as we are all aware, the Trump administration cut down a lot of the refugee programs. So now they're being revamped. People wanting to go to California, Texas, Virginia area. Those areas are congested. So why people are on the bases is because the housing shortage that we have. And people were genuinely frustrated because they have family members that were waiting to house them, but they haven't been reassigned to resettlement agency. I want to caution for any of you that are working with people on the bases, please tell them do not leave the base until they are assigned to resettlement agency, because if you walk into a resettlement agency and you didn't do it on the bases, you might not get taken because they're too busy dealing with the bases. I had a call from someone in Sacramento just yesterday who left the base, who tested positive for COVID, and they didn't have medical insurance, and we're scrambling to find them. So it's very important to stay. So those are the type of work that I was doing on the bases. Now I wish that, Fort Bliss and some of the other ones don't have legal services. So if you are interested in volunteering at the bases, message me. USCCB is coordinating. So that is the bulk of the work, but no actual casework is being done on the basis. I hope that information is helpful.
Thank you, Svajmi. The only thing I would add is just that we've been told that even those who in the early stages of the arrivals in the United States about a month and a half ago, some people left the bases not knowing that if you stayed on base, you would get expedited processing of your work permits and other benefits. And we just got confirmation today that the US government will allow those people who left the bases earlier to access the resettlement benefits and the expedited work permit processing. So that is good. If you're in that position and you left one of the bases and you now are trying to connect with a resettlement agency and access those services that Svajmi just described, you can do so. So we'll drop a link for a fact sheet about what you should do if you're in that situation.
So a question was just asked if they are processing the Ead Card. Absolutely, they are processing it and they're sending it to IOM in DC so that when the person has an address, when they update the AR11 to update their address, it'll be sent there. And the other thing is that the bases are not consistent. I had 2 clients who left Fort McCoy. All they were given was the receipt notice. And I had to figure out that they were C11 paroled in. So now today at the USCIS website, they put up information, and I'm not sure if this is new or old, but if the person came in and they didn't have a passport, they're not necessarily going to have an I-94. And that is crucial for their cases. So at the USCIS website, I'll put it up in the chat, you can use the A number to obtain an I-94. So not everybody is being given all these documents at the different bases. So if you are dealing with people, family members, clients, don't think that it's going to be smooth and you're going to be given a folder. Unfortunately, that's not the case.
So I think just to help those who are leaving the bases so that maybe we can get back to, I think there are probably more questions on other things from the audience. Svajmi mentioned that, once you leave the base, you can then start the different immigration processes that you need to pursue if you're on humanitarian parole. One of the key options for many people is going to be going through that asylum process. And I mentioned we are hopeful that Congress will pass the Afghan Adjustment Act to allow any Afghans who are entering the country to adjust straight to permanent residence, which would then allow you to avoid having to go through the asylum system. But if you are arriving here in the United States right now, you need to make sure that you're pursuing asylum if that's what you're eligible for. Our organization, Human Rights First, is working closely with other legal service organizations across the country to connect any Afghans who need legal assistance seeking asylum to attorneys who will represent them for free. So we will include a link to our legal assistance form where you can submit a request to speak to one of our attorneys about your situation and see if we can help you finding a lawyer to represent you in your case.
I wanted to add, I wanted to add one thing regarding the timing for asylum. If you've entered the United States with humanitarian parole, now keep in mind that the United States government could not process people quickly enough to give them special immigrant visas, which is why they allowed a large number of people to enter with humanitarian parole. I know that many of you know or may not know that humanitarian parole is only good for the period of time that's per the stamp in the passport or in the humanitarian parole document. So it will expire. And once that humanitarian parole date expires, you will be undocumented in this country. And being an undocumented person in this country is not fun. You will not be able to work legally and you will not have proper legal status. So it is really important that you either renew, if you have not applied for asylum, that you renew the humanitarian parole at least 90 days before your humanitarian parole expires. This is extremely, extremely important. Now, also keep in mind, as we were talking about other options, if, to apply for asylum, you have to show a number of things, that you have been persecuted or you will be persecuted if you were returned to Afghanistan, and you're going to be persecuted for reasons of your race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, as well as your political opinion. Okay. You can't just fill out an asylum application and put in any reason that you want. This is the reason why it's extremely important for you to obtain legal counsel, experienced legal counsel to help you with this process. Now, let's say your humanitarian parole expires. Well, what happens? Well, you're here in America. If you marry a US citizen, I'm not saying go out and marry a US citizen, but if your humanitarian parole expires and you fall in love and marry a US citizen, well, you'll be able to apply for a green card through that US citizen's spouse, okay? So, you know, and also, you can also still apply for asylum even after your humanitarian parole expires. But in general, the rule for applying for asylum is you have to apply within 1 year of entering the United States. And this is for the non-attorneys who are on the call today. Very, very important that you need to apply within 1 year. Otherwise, you will have to show that there was some kind of special circumstance that prevented you from applying within 1 year. So it's just going to make it harder. It's not impossible, but it will make it much more difficult for you to obtain asylum after if you apply after 1 year and if you apply after your humanitarian parole expires.
I just wanted to echo Kim, is that one of the questions people are asking on the base was, I have all the documentation to file for SIV and I want to apply for asylum. Which one should I do? First of all, you have to make sure that you have documentation for all of them to do it. You can certainly file both. The key thing to keep in mind is if you do potentially have all the documents for SIV, and you go that route and you go all the way to get the full application called the 360 approved, you do the I-45 and get the green card. Whereas for asylum, if you get it, you have to wait 1 year before applying. So if you apply for asylum, your family members are back home, you get it, the derivatives, they get it, but you're gonna have to wait 1 year to get that green card. Why that's important, people are asking on the basis, yes, you have a work permit to work, but a lot of the jobs also require per se, like green card or citizenship, and people are eager to continue that route. So when you get off the base and you're consulting with an attorney, whether a private attorney or an NGO attorney, nonprofit attorney, those are the discussions you're gonna have. Do I do SIV? Do I do asylum? What are the pros and cons? And so a lot of people on the bases were asking those questions.
Thank you very much for this very useful information. And there are a few questions on special immigrant visas. What happens to someone who has a pending SIV application who is still in Afghanistan? And what happens to someone with a pending special immigrant visa who is at one of the bases abroad?
So that's a very good question. A lot of the people on the bases were either, just submitting the application, or they had the 360 already done and they just needed to do the I-45. Different stages. USCIS itself, or the State Department, they haven't put down the procedures of how we're going to be doing it. The hope is that they're going to provide a procedure. So we know that for those who are inside the United States, they're going to continue their case here in the United States, because most of the time the SIVs were done abroad. They're going to put the procedures in place to continue those cases. For those that are in Afghanistan, the procedural application, since the US embassy is closed in Afghanistan, they're going to have to figure out how they're going to proceed with that and where the individual is going to have their interview. And the discussion has been so far that Doha is possibly one of the bases. So just like I think Kim and we both have, hundreds of cases of Afghans who have filed for their spouses, their fiancés, their parents, their US citizens. We are all waiting, the cases are all complete, and we're waiting at the NVC stage and waiting to see what the procedure is going to be next. So unfortunately, that information is not available through the State Department and USCIS. We're going to have to see, but they're going to have to provide some pathway for both.
Thank you
Just
for that.
To be extra clear though about the processing of these special immigrant visas, they will continue to process them for people who are in the process already. So if you applied and you didn't get the full approval yet, it doesn't mean that you have to start all fresh or you lose everything that was done on the application. The US government has committed to continuing to process those visas for anyone who is in that process already. And then
Robin,
I saw a question about the asylum processing, since we didn't really get to discuss much about it. Just recently, the Congress here in the United States passed new rules and funding for the Afghan people that are arriving here. And one of the things that they have made a new change to is that US government has to process any asylum applications that are filed for these arriving Afghans in a very quick manner, which is good because it means that it will be swiftly resolved, but it also means having a lawyer help you with your asylum application and preparing your case is incredibly important because you're going to have a very short amount of time after you file your application to get everything ready. And it's really important that you have the best application filed and that you prepare a very strong case, because if you do not get granted asylum at the first interview, you can then be referred into what is called removal proceedings, where you then have to present your case before an immigration judge. And it's much better to win your case at the first instance before the asylum office. So please speak to a lawyer before you file your asylum application.
Now, one thing that I think is really important to mention about the asylum application process for Afghans is the issue of material support and terrorism-related bars. Obviously, Afghanistan has been overrun by Taliban, and Taliban has been a reality of the existence, has been a reality in the history of Afghanistan and modern life. It's really important to seek expert legal counsel, because material support, any kind of assistance to a terrorist organization, will bar you from applying and obtaining asylum. This is really, really important. And the definition and the way that the US government defines material support, it's very, very broad. Even if you give them food, any amount of money, I mean, it's very broad. I cannot emphasize enough how important this is. Even though, I know of someone who was denied admission to the United States simply because they said they knew of someone in a terrorist organization. This case was denied point blank without any explanation, and the individual has no idea what to do. This is her husband, they have children, they have no idea how to reunite now. And so, I cannot emphasize enough how important this is, that if you believe there are any potential issues with regard to material support, or if you know, or even if you just know a terrorist, this is something that you have to tell the attorney. And for the attorneys out there practicing, please prepare your clients comprehensively when it comes to these material support issues, because they will come up, especially for these Afghan cases.
Thank you so much for that information and being mindful of time. Now that we are discussing legal representation, could some of our panelists talk a little bit about the help that is out there for Afghans who are in search and in need of legal representation?
So I think we mentioned, oh, sorry, do you want to start? Okay, go for it.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to quickly about humanitarian parole. There are a lot of people doing humanitarian parole right now. There's Project Anar, and there is also PARS Equality Center, which are probably the largest scale humanitarian parole projects right now. We currently aren't taking any more cases. PARS Equality still is, but both organizations have an extreme backlog right now. You may not get assigned a volunteer attorney in a very, very long time. However, I do want to share, I'm going to drop this in the box. I'm going to share a step-by-step checklist that we have put together, and it has all of the forms linked and examples of what the applications can look like. A lot of people, especially people in Afghanistan, have been filing these applications by themselves. And if you don't have the ability to get in contact with an attorney or the resources to get into contact with an attorney, it is absolutely okay to apply for this yourself. And we can offer answering questions and have provided frequently asked questions that hopefully will guide you through that process. And just because I'm on this subject right now, still talking about these applications, I see a question about signatures that I'm really quickly going to answer. USCIS is accepting not e-signatures, so you can't like type in your signature into anything right now, but if you can sign a piece of paper and take a picture of it and put that into your application, that's okay.
So in terms of the legal services, as you're aware, the Bay Area, particularly Fremont area, is the largest, to the Afghan population. So we do have IRC, we have the Jewish Community Services. There are going to be a lot more organizations coming up that I just can't think of. My name, AILA, is going to be having attorneys helping. When these people leave their bases, one of the misconception is that there's an attorney waiting, and there isn't. The September 30th gave, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Robin, $1.7 billion. The resettlement agencies are going to have to find the legal services to give to these individuals. The other biggest thing I saw, not only on the bases I was, but other bases, domestic violence, child abuse. On the basis, I took it upon myself to educate the people that were coming in about domestic violence and how not only would they have criminal consequences and costs affiliated in jail time, but it's going to have catastrophic impact on their ability to get relief that they're seeking. And I think those are the conversations that we need to be having when we are doing these, when individuals are getting off of bases. But there are going to be a lot of organizations providing legal services. Pangea, I just top of my head, there's like half a dozen immigration related. So we'll see that across the country, and everyone like Robin and Kim and everyone else echoing that you must have an attorney to do these. These are complicated, especially for those who are new to this country.
I'll just quickly add that I dropped a link for Human Rights First's webpage that has all our resources for Afghans, both for resources for those who are still in country, and if you need help to address your digital security, as well as accessing safe houses in country. But then we also have our link to request legal assistance, and that's for people who are here in the United States, but also abroad. For those who are here in the United States, we are coordinating a number of legal service organizations across the country who are taking on cases of Afghans. So if you submit a request for assistance through us, we're then working with these other groups to match people to attorneys across the country. If you're an attorney who works for a large law firm and you want to volunteer with us, you can do so. We have, and also I saw Bonnie, you were asking about translation. We are also recruiting interpreters, so that might be something that we could assist your organization with as well. So all those resources are on that webpage.
Thank you, Robin. And is submitting an online request for assistance a guarantee that the person will be admitted into the pro bono program?
Thanks, Anna. That's a great question. So we do consider people's financial situation and whether they have any type of income that would then mean that we need to divert our resources to someone who doesn't have any ability to pay for an attorney. We do make that financial consideration in deciding whether we can assist someone with free legal representation.
Thank you so much. I'm very glad we were able to hear on the legal help that is out there. Please pay attention to the chat. Several links were shared, either if you are interested on requesting legal assistance or if you are interested on offering volunteer services, either at a base or as an interpreter, as a translator. Being mindful of the time, we would also like to share a few legislative actions asks and ways on how you can get involved. But before that, I would like to go back to our panelists and see if there are any last remarks or comments that you would like to make, or if there are any questions on the chat that you would like to address.
I just wanted to mention that, particularly people on the bases, they're very anxious. They're very, in some of the bases, the situations are not, what we would like them to be. And when we have to be patient in these processes, even right now, the immigration system, it could take years for me to do a family-based case. When we're having these conversations with the new arrivals, whether at your nonprofit organization, whether through any connections, they're in dire need of help in many, many capacities. But I think as an immigration attorney, what I would just echo is that this process is going to be very, very overwhelmed, especially with, the 100,000 or plus the people that we're going to be having. So there's no quick turnaround. And I think that's something that we all need to echo to the community, that it will take time and hopefully it'll get resolved.
Yeah, I would just echo that and add that we, those of us in the US can keep putting individual pressure on the government to take action on these applications. It really makes a difference if you reach out to your own members of Congress and tell them, who you're trying to apply for and what steps you've taken and what you want the government to do.
Thank you so much for that comment, Leila. And yes, we must press the Biden administration to continue the evacuation efforts and to not forget about our Afghan allies, including vulnerable populations such as women and girls. And a way of doing so is, as Leila said, to reach out to your members of Congress, to your state representatives, to your senators. And a way of doing this, we are planning an Evacuate Our Allies virtual advocacy days, where we are inviting members of the Afghan and Afghan American community to participate and take part on these legislative visits, where we will be asking our representatives to put pressure on the administration to continue evacuation efforts, and also to support the Afghan Adjustment Act. As several of our panelists mentioned, humanitarian parole does not have a path to permanent residence or to citizenship in the US. And one of the features of the Afghan Adjustment Act, as it has been mentioned, this will allow for Afghans who were paroled into the US between July 2021 until July of 2025 to apply for lawful permanent residency. This is a very important piece of legislation that has yet to be introduced, but will be introduced. And if you are interested and feel energized to advocate for the Afghan community, please reach out. This virtual advocacy days will be taking place in November 9 and 10th. We will circulate the registration link and we will make sure to prepare you for these conversations with your representatives. That's my last invitation to participants. Thank you so much for making time for this event. We apologize for the tech issues. Do keep in mind that this conversation has been recorded and will be shared. I will pass it back one last time to our panelists for any final comments before we end our conversation. If there are no further closing remarks, we are going to end this roundtable. Thank you to all of our panelists for making time. I know everyone is very busy, but this is a very important topic to address. To the participants, again, an apology for the tech issues. We truly hope you found this information helpful. We apologize if we didn't get a chance to address all the questions, and we wish everyone is doing well. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good night.